The crystal-draped private dining room of the Pierre Hotel went dead silent. A ruthless underground boss paused his silver fork inches from his mouth as a 5-year-old girl burst past armed guards. "Don't eat that!" she screamed. When he uncovered her terrifying reason, it didn't just save his life, it upended his entire empire. Damien Costa did not believe in luck, nor did he believe in coincidences. In the violent, meticulously orchestrated world of the Chicago-born, New York-based Costa Syndicate, belief in anything other than leverage and hollow-point bullets was a quick way to end up at the bottom of the East River. At 34, Damien was the undisputed architect of the city's most feared criminal enterprise, operating behind the polished veneer of a Manhattan real estate empire. Tonight, standing in the opulent kitchen corridor of the Pierre on Fifth Avenue, Damien adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal Brioni suit and checked the time on his platinum Vacheron Constantin. He despised these mandatory sit-downs. In the adjacent private banquet hall, Vincent Romano, an aging, treacherous rival who controlled the Brooklyn shipping docks, was waiting. They were supposed to be negotiating a peace treaty over seared scallops and truffles, but Damien knew the air in that room was thick with unspoken threats. Needing a moment of quiet before the psychological warfare began, Damien had slipped away to the catering kitchen seeking a glass of Macallan 25 from his private stash. Instead of an empty room, he found her. Evelyn Hayes was 28, exhausted, and running entirely on espresso and sheer willpower. As a high-end freelance pastry chef, landing the contract for a private, ultra-exclusive VIP dinner at the Pierre was supposed to be her ticket out of the crushing debt left behind by her late husband. For the past 2 years, Evelyn and her 5-year-old daughter Lily had barely scraped by in a drafty one-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens. Evelyn was bent over a stainless steel prep table, expertly piping dark chocolate ganache onto gold-dusted tartlets. A stray lock of auburn hair had escaped her messy bun, and a smudge of flour dusted her cheek. She moved with a frantic but mesmerizing grace. Damien stood in the doorway, the heavy oak door swinging shut behind him. The click of their latch made Evelyn jump. She spun around, a silver offset spatula raised defensively in her hand. "The kitchen is strictly off-limits to guests during service," Evelyn said, her voice breathy but firm. She took in the sight of the man before her. He was strikingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features, piercing dark eyes, and a jawline carved from granite. But there was a lethal, predatory stillness about him that made the hairs on the back of Evelyn's neck stand up. Damien's eyes flicked from the spatula to her flushed face, a faint, dangerous smirk playing on his lips. "I was informed this entire floor was reserved for my party. That makes this my kitchen for the evening." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She had dealt with arrogant Wall Street bankers and entitled trust fund heirs, but this man felt entirely different. He didn't just walk into a room, he claimed the oxygen in it. "Well, Mr. Whoever you are, unless you know how to stabilize a Swiss meringue, you are standing in my light," Evelyn retorted, turning back to her tartlets. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she refused to show fear. Damien froze. He was a man who commanded legions. People didn't speak to him. They practically begged for his permission to breathe. Yet this woman, smelling of vanilla bean and burnt sugar, was dismissing him like a nuisance. He found himself stepping closer, invading her space, captivated by the defiant tilt of her chin. "Damien," he murmured, his deep voice vibrating over the hum of the commercial refrigerators. "My name is Damien." "Congratulations, Damien. I'm Evelyn, and I have exactly 12 minutes to finish plating these desserts before the banquet manager has a stroke. So if you'd kindly step aside." Damien leaned against the stainless steel counter, close enough that Evelyn could smell the intoxicating blend of cedarwood expensive scotch and something sharply metallic like gunpowder. He watched her hands tremble slightly as she worked. "You're nervous, Evelyn. Working a private dinner for men you don't know. You shouldn't be here." Evelyn stopped her grip tightening on the piping bag. "I go where the paycheck is. I have a daughter to feed and rent is due on Tuesday. So forgive me if I don't care about the VIPs in the next room." At the mention of a daughter, Damien's gaze softened by a fraction of a millimeter. He reached out his large, calloused hand, hovering just inches from her face. Evelyn gasped softly, but couldn't pull away. With his thumb, Damien gently brushed the smudge of flour from her cheek. The physical contact sent a jolt of electricity straight through Evelyn's spine. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man who looked like he could snap someone's neck without breaking a sweat. "Be careful," Evelyn, Damien whispered, his eyes locking onto hers with intense gravity. "The men in that room do not play by the rules of civil society. When service is over, take your money and run." Before Evelyn could process the warning, the kitchen door swung open, and Carmine, Damien's hulking head of security, stepped in. "Boss, Romano is getting restless. It's time." Damien didn't break eye contact with Evelyn for another long second. Then the warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a glacial, terrifying emptiness. He turned and walked out, leaving Evelyn shivering in the overheated kitchen, entirely unaware that the man who had just touched her face was the most dangerous criminal on the eastern seaboard. The atmosphere inside the private dining room was suffocating. Heavy mahogany paneling and dim crystal chandeliers cast long, sinister shadows over the long table. Damien sat at the head, nursing his Macallan. His posture relaxed, but his muscles coiled like a striking viper. Across from him sat Vincent Romano, flanked by heavily armed associates, masquerading as personal assistants. "You're asking for too much of the Red Hook ports," Damien Romano rasped, cutting into a rare filet mignon. Your father understood boundaries. You, on the other hand, want the whole damn island." "My father compromised," Vincent Damien replied, his voice, a low, smooth baritone that cut through the clinking of silverware, "and he died on the pavement outside a steakhouse because of it. I don't compromise." Meanwhile, deep in the labyrinth of the hotel's back-of-house corridors, little Lily Hayes was on a mission. Evelyn had explicitly told her 5-year-old daughter to stay hidden in the banquet manager's locked office with an iPad and a plate of strawberries. But the iPad had died, and the room was scary and dark. Clutching her worn, stuffed rabbit, Lily had slipped out to find her mother. As she padded softly down a carpeted hallway just behind the main kitchen, Lily heard footsteps. She ducked behind a heavy velvet curtain, pressing her small back against the wall. Through a crack in the fabric, she watched a man in a crisp white server's uniform, pushing a brass dessert cart. The man stopped, looking nervously over his shoulder. He pulled a small, innocuous-looking glass vial from his pocket. Lily's bright blue eyes tracked his movements. As the man unscrewed the cap and sprinkled a fine, translucent powder over the center dessert plate, a dark chocolate tartlet dusted with gold, his cuff rode up. Lily stopped breathing. Etched into the man's pale skin, just above his wrist, was a crude, bright red tattoo of a scorpion. A cold wave of primal terror washed over the little girl. She was only 3 when her father, an investigative journalist, digging into cartel money laundering, had been murdered in their living room. But Lily had been hiding in the hallway closet that night. She hadn't seen the killer's face. She had only seen a hand resting on the doorframe as the man stood over her father's body. A hand with a bright red scorpion tattoo. Her mother had always told her to be brave. Her mother had said the bad man was gone. But he wasn't. He was right here putting bad salt on the pretty chocolate her mommy made. In the dining room, the heavy oak doors swung open. The tension suspended for a moment as the waitstaff filed in, silently placing the decadent chocolate tartlets in front of the guests. The server with the red scorpion tattoo placed the center plate directly in front of Damien Costa. Dessert Romano sneered, raising his glass of Barolo wine. To the future of our business, Damien. May we both get exactly what we deserve. Damien stared at the gold-flecked chocolate. He picked up his silver dessert fork. He didn't have a sweet tooth, but in these meetings, refusing food was a sign of weakness, a paranoid admission of fear. He sliced into the ganache, raising a small piece toward his mouth. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the dining hall burst open. "Don't eat that!" The scream was high-pitched, desperate, and entirely out of place. The room erupted. In less than a second, 4 of Damien's men had their hands inside their suit jackets, gripping their Glock 19s. Romano's men mirrored the action chairs, scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Damien froze. The fork was exactly 2 inches from his lips. He lowered it slowly, his dark eyes locking onto the tiny, trembling figure standing in the doorway. It was a little girl with auburn hair, clutching a stuffed rabbit, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "Stand down, Damien," barked his voice, echoing like a gunshot. The command was absolute. The room went still, though the air was thick with lethal intent. Before anyone could speak, Evelyn sprinted into the room, her face drained of all color. She dropped to her knees, grabbing Lily by the shoulders and pulling her tightly to her chest. "I'm so sorry," Evelyn gasped, looking up at the table of terrifying, suited men. Her eyes locked onto Damien, and her breath hitched. The handsome man from the kitchen. The realization of what he truly was hit her like a freight train. She got out of the office. "Please, we're leaving right now." "Wait," Damien commanded. He stood up slowly, towering over the table. He didn't look at Evelyn. His piercing gaze was fixed entirely on the 5-year-old girl. He walked around the table, his heavy leather shoes silent on the rug. When he reached them, he crouched down so he was eye level with Lily. Evelyn trembled, holding her daughter tighter, preparing to beg for their lives, but Damien's voice was shocking in its gentleness. "Why did you tell me not to eat that little one?" Damien asked. Lily sniffled, burying her face in her mother's apron, before peeking out at the terrifying man. She raised a small shaking finger, pointing past Damien directly at the waiter standing near the exit doors. The man with the red scorpion on his arm. Lily whimpered, her voice echoing in the dead, silent room. "He put the bad salt on your chocolate. He's the same man who visited my daddy before he went to heaven." For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to stop spinning. Damien's blood ran ice cold. A red scorpion tattoo. The signature mark of Anton Vargas, an elite ghost-like hitman contracted by the Russian mob, and the very man who had put 3 bullets into Damien's father 5 years ago. Damien's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto the waiter. The waiter's face contorted in panic. He shoved his hand under his serving apron, drawing a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP. "Carmine, get down!" Damien roared. Without hesitation, Damien lunged forward, throwing his massive frame over Evelyn and Lily, tackling them behind a solid marble pillar, just as the dining room erupted into absolute chaos. The deafening crack of gunfire shattered the crystal chandeliers, showering the room in jagged glass. Wood splintered. Men screamed. Evelyn clamped her hands over Lily's ears, screaming in terror as bullets tore through the room. She was crushed beneath Damien's weight, but paradoxically, she had never felt safer. His broad shoulders completely shielded them from the deadly crossfire. Damien pulled his own weapon, firing 2 blind shots around the pillar to provide cover. He looked down at Evelyn, his chest heaving, his dark eyes blazing with an intoxicating mix of adrenaline and something far more dangerous. "Stay down," he commanded, his face inches from hers. "Who are you?" Evelyn cried out over the gunfire, tears cutting through the flour on her face. Damien reloaded his magazine with a sharp mechanical click. "I'm the man whose life your daughter just saved. Which means, Evelyn Hayes, you and I are now bound by blood." The shootout raged on, tearing the luxurious Pierre dining room to shreds. But in the shadows of the marble pillar, as Damien Costa looked at the terrified baker and the brave little girl who had just changed his fate, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: no one was ever going to touch them again. The deafening echoes of gunfire faded into a ringing silence, replaced only by the groans of wounded men and the wail of distant police sirens echoing off the concrete canyons of Manhattan. The once immaculate private dining room of the Pierre was a war zone. Shattered crystal coated the Persian rugs like ice, and the heavy mahogany table was splintered beyond repair. Anton Vargas, the phantom hitman with the red scorpion tattoo, had vanished in the chaos, slipping through the hotel's service elevators like a ghost. Damien Costa rose slowly from the debris, brushing shattered glass from his charcoal Brioni suit. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle feathered beneath his ear. He looked down at Evelyn, who was still curled fiercely over Lily behind the ruined marble pillar. The baker's white uniform was stained with soot and a few drops of someone else's blood, but her eyes, wide and terrified, were locked onto Damien. Carmine Damien roared over the ringing in his ears. The hulking head of security emerged from the smoke, his left arm bleeding sluggishly, but his weapon still raised. "Boss, Romano is dead. Caught a stray in the throat. Half his crew is down, the rest ran. The shooter Vargas. He slipped the net." "I don't care about Romano." Romano Damien snarled his voice, a lethal vibrating register that demanded absolute obedience. "Get the armored Maybach to the loading dock. Now. We are moving." Without waiting for a response, Damien reached down. His massive calloused hands, which only moments ago had been discharging a firearm with deadly precision, were surprisingly gentle as he gripped Evelyn's elbows and pulled her to her feet. He then scooped Lily up into his arms in one fluid motion. The 5-year-old girl didn't cry. She simply buried her face into the crook of Damien's neck, her small hands clutching the lapels of his ruined suit. "Walk with me. Do not look down. Do not stop moving," Damien instructed Evelyn, his dark eyes demanding her focus. Evelyn's legs felt like lead, but the raw, commanding aura radiating from Damien propelled her forward. They bypassed the carnage, slipping through the shattered kitchen doors and down a labyrinth of concrete service corridors until they burst into the freezing night air of the loading dock. A sleek, midnight black Mercedes Maybach, S680 Guard, idled aggressively, its heavily armored doors already swung wide open by 2 of Damien's men. Damien ushered Evelyn and Lily into the cavernous leather-scented back seat before climbing in beside them. 432 Park Avenue. The penthouse Damien barked to the driver. "Burn every red light." The massive engine roared, and the Maybach tore through the Manhattan streets, a shadow flying through the neon-lit grid. Inside the soundproof cabin, the silence was thick, suffocating. Evelyn pulled Lily onto her lap, rocking her gently. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs as the adrenaline began to crash, leaving behind a cold, shivering terror. She looked at the man sitting across from her. Damien was staring out of the tinted window, his profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. He looked like a fallen angel, beautiful, untouchable, and utterly terrifying. "You're the Costa Syndicate," Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking. It wasn't a question. Growing up in the boroughs, everyone knew the whispers of the Costa family, the untouchable empire that controlled real estate shipping and politicians. Damien shifted his gaze to her, his dark eyes unreadable. I am. That man? The waiter. Lily said he killed her father. My husband. Evelyn choked on a sob, her grip on Lily tightening. Daniel was a journalist. He was investigating offshore accounts tied to Russian oligarchs. The police told me it was a random break-in. A burglary gone wrong. Damien leaned forward, the space between them suddenly vanishing. Anton Vargas does not do random break-ins, Evelyn. He is an apex predator, a contracted executioner for the Bratva. 5 years ago, my father refused to hand over our shipping lanes to the Russians. Vargas was sent to send a message. He put 3 hollow points into my father's chest. The police were paid off to look the other way. Your husband's death was an assassination. He must have found the money trail linking the Russians to Vargas. Evelyn felt the breath leave her lungs. The fragile, painful reality she had built over the last 5 years shattered completely. Her husband's murder hadn't been a tragic accident of living in a bad neighborhood. It had been a calculated execution. Why didn't he kill Lily Evelyn? Breathed tears finally spilling over her lashes. If he saw her... He didn't see her, Damien said softly, reaching out to gently brush a stray lock of auburn hair from Lily's forehead. The little girl had fallen asleep, her tiny body exhausted by the trauma. If Vargas had known there was a witness to his hit, he would have never stopped hunting her. Today, by speaking up, your daughter didn't just save my life, Evelyn. She exposed herself. Vargas knows she recognized him. He knows she can identify his face and that tattoo. A fresh wave of horror crashed over Evelyn. Oh God, he's going to come for her. He's going to come for us. No. Damien's voice was absolute, carrying the weight of a blood oath. He reached across the console, wrapping his large, warm hand over Evelyn's trembling fingers. The contact sent a jolt of heat straight to her core, grounding her panic. He has to get through me first. And I promise you, Evelyn, the devil himself, could not pry you or this little girl from my protection. The Maybach pulled into the highly secured subterranean garage of 432 Park Avenue. Damien's private elevator required retinal scans and dual keycards, rocketing them up 96 floors to a penthouse that floated above the clouds. The residence was a fortress of floor-to-ceiling, blast-proof glass, black marble, and cold modernist luxury. It was beautiful, but it felt like a high-altitude prison. Carmine will show you to the guest wing. There are clothes, food, whatever you need, Damien said, shrugging off his suit jacket, revealing the holstered weapon strapped to his broad chest. Do not stand near the windows. Evelyn watched him turn away, barking orders into a secure, encrypted phone to lock down the city. She realized with a terrifying clarity that she was no longer just a struggling baker from Queens. She was the guest of the most powerful kingpin in New York, and her survival depended entirely on his ruthlessness. The tension inside the penthouse over the next 48 hours was thick enough to choke on. Damien had transformed the luxury residence into a heavily fortified command center. Monitors tracked security feeds from every bridge and tunnel in Manhattan. His men, armed with assault rifles, patrolled the perimeter of the building. Despite the grim circumstances, an unexpected domesticity had begun to bloom in the sterile penthouse. Evelyn, unable to sit still with anxiety, had taken over Damien's immaculate, unused chef's kitchen. The scent of freshly baked brioche and caramelized sugar drifted through the marble halls, battling the lingering smell of gun oil and espresso. Lily, remarkably resilient, had taken a strong liking to Damien. The ruthless Mafia boss who routinely ordered the destruction of rival empires found himself sitting on a $1 million custom velvet sofa, clumsily holding a plastic teacup, while a 5-year-old poured him imaginary Earl Grey. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the living room, wiping flour from her hands, watching the surreal scene. Damien wore a simple black Henley that stretched across his heavily muscled chest, his tattoos barely visible at the collar. He looked up, catching Evelyn's eye. The sheer heat in his gaze made her stomach flip. There was an unspoken magnetic pull between them, a violent collision of two entirely different worlds bound together by trauma and survival. "She likes you," Evelyn said softly, stepping into the room. Damien set the tiny pink cup down on the glass coffee table. "I'm not a man who is usually liked by children, or anyone for that matter." I don't believe that Evelyn countered, sitting on the opposite end of the sofa. "You're terrifying, yes. You operate outside the law, but you shielded us. You took us in. You aren't the monster the tabloids claim you are, Damien." Damien's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his dark eyes piercing hers. "Do not romanticize me, Evelyn. I am a monster. I have done unspeakable things to build this empire. I destroy people. But," he paused, his gaze softening, as he looked at Lily, who had wandered over to the floor-to-ceiling window to look at the city lights. "When she looked at me in that dining room, it was the first time in my life someone looked at me, not to take something from me, but to save me. I owe her a debt I can never repay." Before Evelyn could respond, the penthouse was plunged into absolute darkness. The hum of the city below remained, but the power to the entire 96th floor had been cleanly severed. The backup generators didn't kick in. "Get down!" Damien roared, moving with terrifying speed. He tackled Evelyn to the floor just as the massive blast-proof glass windows shattered inward. The explosive breach was deafening. High-powered incendiary rounds tore through the apartment, shredding the velvet furniture and shattering the marble tables. Vargas hadn't just found them. He had brought a small army equipped with military-grade hardware. Lily Evelyn screamed, blinded by the smoke and flying debris. "I have her!" Damien yelled. He had rolled across the glass-covered floor, scooping the terrified child into his arms and tossing her securely behind a solid concrete structural column. Tactical flashlights cut through the smoke as 4 heavily armed mercenaries repelled through the blown-out windows. Damien didn't hesitate. He drew his twin Glocks, moving with a lethal fluid grace that was almost hypnotic to watch. He dispatched the first 2 mercenaries with clinical precision, 2 suppressed shots to the chest, 1 to the head. But out of the smoke emerged the Phantom himself, Anton Vargas. The Russian hitman was tall, wiry, and carried a suppressed submachine gun. The red scorpion tattoo on his wrist was stark against his pale skin. He fired a volley of bullets toward the column where Evelyn and Lily were hiding. Damien intercepted, throwing his body into the line of fire. A bullet grazed his left shoulder, tearing through his shirt and spraying blood across the floor. But he didn't even flinch. He holstered one weapon and lunged at Vargas before the hitman could reload. The physical collision was brutal. Damien slammed Vargas into the marble kitchen island, the sheer force cracking the stone. Vargas slashed outward with a jagged combat knife, tearing a deep gash across Damien's forearm. Damien grunted, absorbing the pain, his eyes burning with a demonic fury. This was the man who had murdered his father. This was the man who had destroyed Evelyn's family. With a roar of raw, primal rage, Damien twisted Vargas's wrist, forcing the knife out of his hand. He gripped the hitman by the throat, lifting him inches off the ground, pinning him against the shattered window frame, with nothing but a 96-story drop to the Manhattan streets below. "You missed your shot 5 years ago." Anton Damien whispered, his voice a chilling harbinger of death. "And you missed it today." Vargas choked, clawing at Damien's iron grip, his eyes wide, with realizing his own mortality. "The Bratva will never stop." "Let them come," Damien snarled. With a brutal shove, Damien released his grip. Vargas plummeted backwards into the void of the night sky, his scream swallowed by the howling wind of the city. Damien stood at the edge of the shattered window, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his shoulder and arm. The remaining mercenaries, seeing their leader fall, had already fled back up their tactical ropes. Carmine and the security team burst through the stairwell doors seconds later, sweeping the penthouse, but the immediate threat was over. Damien turned, slowly ignoring his men. He walked over to the concrete column. Evelyn was clutching Lily, shaking uncontrollably, her eyes wide, as she took in the blood soaking Damien's shirt. He dropped to his knees in front of them, wincing slightly. He reached out with his uninjured hand, gently cupping Evelyn's face, smearing a bit of soot on her cheek. "It's over," Damien breathed, his forehead resting against hers. "He's gone. You're safe. Both of you." Evelyn let out a shattered sob, dropping her forehead against his broad chest, burying her hands into his ruined shirt. She didn't care about the blood or the danger. She only cared that he was here, solid and alive, wrapping his arms around them like an impenetrable fortress. "What happens now?" Evelyn whispered, looking up into his dark, storm-filled eyes. Damien looked from Evelyn to Lily, who was peering up at him with wide, trusting blue eyes. The ruthless Mafia boss, the architect of New York's underworld, knew in that exact moment that his old life was over. He had found his queen, and he had found his daughter. Now, Damien said softly, pressing a fierce, possessive kiss to Evelyn's forehead, "We build a world where no one ever makes you run again." Did this thrilling Mafia romance keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved the intense twists, explosive action, and the unexpected bond between a ruthless boss and a brave little girl, please hit that like button. Do not forget to share this video with friends, and subscribe to our channel for more heart-pounding, high-stakes romantic dramas. Drop a comment below, sharing your absolute favorite shocking moment today.